Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Giselle, and today I will be introducing to you a workshop in conflict in marriage. And we have a lot to cover, so we're just going to jump right into it. I'm going to share my screen to show you some of the materials that I do have prepared. First, we have a presentation, and then we will go over a few handouts. And all of these handouts are expanded through the presentation, so we will go over them within the presentation because they are simply just handouts on studies that were done to observe and learn about conflict in marriage. And last but not least, at the very end, we will be going over a quiz that I do have for you to take, and then after you have taken the quiz, then I will reveal to you the answers, so you will know how well you did. Now let's start with the presentation. We wanted to define interpersonal conflict as a problematic situation in which two parties seek incompatible goals or incompatible means to the same ends. Now, this definition is from the course's textbook, Con and Abigail. And the inevitability of conflict principle is also defined in the textbook as the closer we become to someone emotionally, the more likely conflict will occur. So when we face interpersonal conflict, it is because we have come to a disagreement with someone, a second party, or it could even be several parties that will experience interpersonal conflicts. And it is more likely that conflict will occur when the relationship between the individual is very close with the other person. We are not so likely to experience conflict with someone that we are not very close with emotionally. So that is why I wanted to focus my workshop on conflict in marriage, because I believe that couples in relationships, especially married couples who have been with each other long term, do face conflict very much, very often, very easily. And I just wanted to learn more about why they face conflict and how they can resolve their issues. So, to expand on the reasons why conflict happens in marriage, some of the reasons are just deciding how to discipline children. Sometimes marriage deals with conflicts over money. Sometimes married couples conflict over in-laws or the division of household labor. According to Kennedy and Ruggles, the divorce rates increased in 40% from 1980 to 2008. And that is another reason why I really wanted to learn about conflict management in marriage, because a lot of married couples vow to spend the rest of their lives together, and many of them do not accomplish that commitment that they had set for themselves. A lot of them divorce or separate, and I just wanted to learn more about just some useful techniques of how to deal with conflict so that things are kept together, the relationship, the marriage is kept together, and what are some ways that individuals can learn to do so. A few of these studies have studied interpersonal power, and interpersonal power is the degree of influence one person has over another in an unbalanced relationship. So in relationships that are unbalanced, there is an individual who has more power than the other partner. And when a relationship is balanced, then that is because both partners have the same amount of power. And power is just related to like decision making once again, and just having that influence and control in the relationship. It is very much associated with the chilling effects, which is choosing to remain silent about irritating situations in order to avoid negative outcomes in the relationship and or consequences personally. Um, so a question in these two concepts could be, does a partner's power influence the decision to withhold complaints? So if someone's partner has more power in the relationship than they do, then most likely that individual will withhold complaints and they will not discuss or assert certain issues or situations that irritate them or make them feel frustrated or distressed in any type of way. When you are able to um, comfortably tell your partner and communicate with your partner about an issue that is negative, then most likely the relationship is balanced and both partners have the same amount of power. Um, but for those who kind of feel a little bit more intimidated to do so, that is because they are under the influence of the chilling effects. Moving forward, a marital schema is a cognitive structure that contains organized knowledge about marriage relationships. Um, it includes the internal model of marriage, interpreting one's behavior and the behavior of one's partner, and it may influence the decision to withhold complaints. In other words, marital schema is kind of like your expectation or your idea of what marriage is or what it's supposed to be, what it is like. Um, and as mentioned before, some people withholds their complaints in their marriage or relationship because of the outcomes that they believe will take place and what their expectations are of their marriage or of marriage in general. And there are three different types of marital schemas. So one being traditional, another being independent, and another being separate. So to distinguish all three of these from one another, traditionals emphasize sex roles and normative societal customs. So once again, traditionals are um, the name within itself. Back in the 50s or the 60s in marriages, it was seen that men had higher power, men brought in all of the income, women were supposed to do the chores around the house, take care of the kids, be very submissive, do as the man in the household says. So back then, the marital schema that was very popular and pretty much the norm in society was a traditional type in which sex roles were very, very highly emphasized and following those customs in society. There was no assertiveness, so there was no openness, communication between the woman and the husband. There was no type of complaints that was revealed to the partner if there was an issue that one had. One would just keep it to themselves and pretty much just avoid it. There is high interdependence in traditional couples. Interdependence can be defined as the togetherness and companionship between the spouses. So just being very interdependent of or dependent of one's partner. And a lot of traditional couples emphasize positive over negative feelings or express positive over negative feelings. So as mentioned, there's no assertiveness, there is no talking about what type of things bother oneself. You just try to be positive, and the whole relationship and the marriage is just pretty. There's no negative feelings. There's trying not to conflicts or communicate about anything negative at all. You just want to avoid anything that bothers you and just try to be that, happy couple that has no problems. The woman does not complain about anything. She's just very submissive. She just does as she's expected to do. And independents, on the other hand, are very different from traditionals. So independents believe that relationships should not restrict the freedom of an individual. they emphasize separate space and separate friends. And they are assertive, so they do talk and communicate about problems that they believe exist. They have high interdependence and they express both positive and negative feelings. So they really communicate about things that do bother them and they try to work those things out. Separates are very different on the other hand as well. They believe in individuality over togetherness. They try to emphasize their freedom. So, although they are in a relationship with one another, although they are committed, although they are married, they try to definitely take some time to be by themselves and be their own person, have their own freedom. They are very avoidant, so they do not communicate very effectively. They have low interdependence, so they don't really work together very much. And they're very closed off. So separate marriages are just basically marriages in which you're just in it to be married, but you don't really have that communication. And so all of these three are different types of marital schemas. It does relate to a study done by Solomon et al. Uh, it was a questionnaire of 215 married individuals, and the questions included such phrases as, how attached are you to your spouse? How committed are you to your marriage? How would your partner react if you said something that irritated you? Um, or if you said that something irritated you. Such responses to this question specifically were as listed. My partner would insult or swear at me. My partner would refuse to talk, would stomp out, would say something out of spite, would threaten to break up, become cold or less affectionate, hit or throw something at me, push, grab, or shove me, slap me, kick, hit, or punch me, and hit with something. Um, so the results for this questionnaire were that separates perceived the partners to be more aggressive than traditionals and independents. There was a significant association between marital schema and unexpressed complaints. So interdependence or independence, I mean, had a very low proportion of unexpressed complaints. So as I said before, the independents expressed both positive and negative feelings. So there wasn't a really high proportion of withholding complaints, not so much of a chilling effect there because those individuals felt very confident in discussing certain issues and conflicts with their partner. Um, Whereas separates were completely different. They had the highest proportion of unexpressed complaints because, as we said before, separates are very avoidant, they're very closed off. Um, they don't communicate very well, so they have many unexpressed complaints. And traditionals are kind of in between, where the level of unexpressed complaints is kind of moderate. They don't have too many, but they don't have too little, you know. Um, and then to move on to a different study that talks about power and violence. There are power bases, power processes, and power outcomes. Power bases include one's own personal assets, so the things that one has, such as knowledge, skill, rewards, or resources. Um, Power bases includes forming control over one's partner and having authority. Um, so power bases is just uh, like who has authority in their relationship, who has more skill, who is more um knowledgeable when it comes to communicating, who has higher resources like money, who has the higher income in the relationship. And power processes is the interactional techniques such as assertiveness, persuasion, problem solving, or demandingness that individuals use in their attempts to gain control. um, in other words, like, what is the process of communicating a conflict to one's partner? Are you very assertive? Do you try to persuade your partner, or are you just very demanding? Um, and power outcomes are who makes the final decision and who wins ultimately. What is the outcome of the conflict situation? What resolution or what is the ending that the married couple comes to? Um, and A study by Babcock and colleagues in 1993 consisted of 95 subjects, and these subjects were categorized into 3 different groups. One being the distressed violent group, one being the distressed nonviolent group, and another being the happy nonviolent group. So the classification of one being happy or distressed was assessed through the Short Marital Adjustment Test, or the SMAT. A score of 115 and higher classified an individual as happy, and a score of 90 and below classified one as being distressed. To classify one as violent or non-violence, the violence person is defined as someone who has engaged in 6 minor acts of pushing, hitting, or 2 moderate acts of slapping, or 1 life-threatening act of beating up or threatening with a knife or gun in the past year. So the time frame is very important in assessing this type of individual. And for individuals who are classified as nonviolent, are those who have no reports of physical aggression in the past 5 years and never having any threats at all. The time frame is very different, and so are the acts of violence. There is no act at all of violence for those who are classified as nonviolent. And then they also studied individuals by assessing a couple of questionnaires, with one being the Communication Patterns Questionnaire, or the CPQ. And the individuals were asked, what is the likelihood of a husband demand wife withdraw interaction, and what is the likelihood of a wife demand husband withdraw interaction, so vice versa. In order to define someone as being demanding, that would be one who tries to discuss a problem and demands the spouse to engage. And one who withdraws or avoids is someone who avoids the discussion, withdraws, becomes silent, refuses to further discuss the matter. So demanding is just someone who is trying to get to their partner and trying to tell them, like, okay, there's something that is very problematic right now going on in our relationship, and I demand that, we try to, figure it out and solve it. For example, one spouse might demand their other spouse to go to couples therapy or marriage therapy. They are demanding that, there's action that must be taken in order to resolve conflict. And someone who withdraws is someone who just totally refuses to go to therapy and to engage in that type of treatment. And another questionnaire was the who does what questionnaire. So who is responsible for household tasks, who is responsible for family decision making, and who is responsible for caring for the children. This is very important in assessing conflict and power in marriage, because one's power can be determined by how much they do or how much their partner does in the relationship. And these things can resolve in conflict if it is unbalanced. The results from this study were that a higher discrepancy in an unbalanced relationship leads to an increase in violence. Specifically, women with higher job statuses, incomes, and education are more likely to experience life-threatening violence than wives who had similar occupations as their husbands. So again, that higher discrepancy is more likely to lead to more violence. And especially when men have less power as well. When men have less power in the relationship, they are more likely to be physically abusive. They use this violence to make up for their lack of power. They use it to get what they want. They use their actions as an excuse for just not knowing how to manage a conflict effectively. So men who have, that low communication skill, that power, that base, that personal asset, if you don't have that skill, then you are more likely to be physically aggressive, and you are likely to cause violence. Men who do not know how to communicate effectively will just become physically violent towards their partners, because that's the only way that they can gain control. That's the only way that they could think of controlling the situation and getting what they wanted. And on the other hand, wives with low communication skills are not physically violent, or at least they don't tend to be, but they are psychologically abusive. So they can say, horrible things emotionally and mentally. Um, and so that is another difference. Um, to move on another note, Conflict in Later Life and Long-Term Marriages by Dixon and colleagues in 2002 studied 25 married couples that had been together for more than 40 years. They were interviewed in person about current and past conflicts in marriage. The questionnaire consisted of several questions, with one being, describe your marriage conflict in later years. And several of the individuals in that study revealed that it was very difficult for them to think of recent conflicts. And they wouldn't have even labeled their recent interactions as conflicts. They would have more believed for them to be small disagreements. And they just couldn't really remember very many examples or instances in which they engaged in conflicts in recent years or in later years of their marriage. When they were asked to describe any changes in conflict over time, they revealed that in the earlier years of their marriage, that is when they had more intense disagreements. And usually these disagreements that they had, or these conflicts, were over disciplining children, or how to discipline their children, as mentioned earlier. Over time, however, they have learned to work with one another. Um, these individuals were asked to describe the relationship between the life stage and conflict patterns. Um, and again, they said that, you know, current conflicts were very non-aggressive. However, past conflicts were aggressive, in which the individuals would yell at each other, scream at each other. Um, However, now, in their later life stages, there was just no more energy for them to even want to escalate conflicts or to argue anymore. They were not stubborn as they were in their younger years of life. And there was just simply nothing to argue about anymore. There was no arguing over how to discipline children, because the children were already grown up and they were already moved out. So that was one less conflict that they had to experience later on in their long-term marriage. And over time, they learned to compromise and collaborate. So those are two very important skills to have in communication, especially in communication management, learning how to compromise and collaborate with others. Um, and just to define these key terms, compromising is making sure that no one totally wins or loses. Conflicting parties are settling for a workable solution rather than finding a totally mutually satisfying solution. And collaboration is using integrative behaviors such as cooperation and mutual assistance to develop a satisfying agreement and solve the problem once and for all. The last study that was conducted in this research was the communication and satisfaction study of Burleson and Denton in 1997. There were 60 couples who were assessed questionnaires and communication exercises. These consisted of the marital satisfaction assessments and dyadic adjustment scale. The results for the study proves that there is a positive correlation between wives being effective communicators and husbands being satisfied in the marriage. And the conclusion is that the major source of distress in a relationship is a lack of communication. Good communication equals a good marriage. Um, so more communication equals more happiness in a marriage. It is very distressful when married couples cannot communicate with one another effectively. Um, and I think that that is one key takeaway that we can all take away from this workshop and this lecture, is that, many times people are questioned, what is the most important thing in a relationship? And, there are many several answers that could be given, like loyalty, respect, honesty, um, love, care, support. But with so much research done on marriages, um, it is very wise to say, I guess, that communication is definitely important. One of the most important things, if not the most important thing in a marriage. That's really the only way that a marriage could and would last, if both partners learn to communicate with one another effectively, learn how to collaborate through conflicts, and just have that understanding and that empathy for one another. These are the references, the 4 studies and handouts, as well as the textbook for definitions. The handouts are here. These handouts are basically the studies that were included in the presentation with their hypothesis, the method, the results, and the citation. So we went over power and violence in the presentation. We talked about the relationship between communication skill and marital satisfaction, conflicts in later life and long-term marriages, and relational power, marital schema, and decisions to withhold complaints. With all of this that you have learned of in the lecture, I'm going to go ahead and show you a quiz that you can take. It's 10 multiple choice questions. I'm going to go over them really quickly and then I'll reveal the answers afterwards. So just go ahead and take a few seconds to answer each question one by one. Let's start off with number 1. By what percentage did divorce rates increase between the years 1980 and 2008? Reflect back onto the presentation. Was it A, 40%, B, 27%, C, 18%, or D, 43%? Go ahead and choose your answer. And then we will move on to number 2. What are the 3 types of marital schemas? Are they A, independent, interdependent, and old-fashioned? B, reliable, reliance, and traditional? C, traditional, separate, and combined? Or D, separate, traditional, and independent? Go ahead and choose one, and then we will move on to question number 3. Which of the following is not a power process used to gain control? Is it demandingness, withdrawal, persuasion, or assertiveness? Choose A, B, C, or D, and then let's move on to number 4. How many years does a relationship have to be free of physical aggression in order to be considered non-violent? Is it 1, 3, 2, or 5 years? Go ahead and choose your option, and then we will move on to question number 5. What 2 skills did the Dixon participants learn during their long-term marriages? Were they A, empathy and respect, B, compromising and trust, C, compromising and collaboration, or D, empathy and assertiveness? Moving on to question 6. Which of the following was not a response to Dixon's questionnaire asking to describe a recent conflict in the participant's marriage? A, my spouse and I are currently in conflict. B, there have been no recent conflicts in our marriage. C, I don't remember. Or D, we did have a small disagreement the other day, but I wouldn't label it as a conflict. Go ahead and decide, and then we will move on to question number 7. According to lecture, which of the following is a common reason for conflict in marriage? A, being possessive and controlling. B, how to discipline children. C, not showing appreciation or affection towards one's partner. Or D, still being friends with an ex-lover. On to question 8. What is the inevitability of conflict principle state? A, conflict is unavoidable. B, married couples face conflict more frequently than unmarried couples do. C, the closer we are to someone emotionally, the more we are at risk for conflicts. Or D, women control conflicts better than men do. Question number 9. Which of the following terms is defined by withholding complaints in order to avoid escalation of conflict? Is it A, withdrawal avoidance, B, gunny sacking, C, hesitance, or D, the chilling effect? And finally, 10. Which of the following definitions best defines marital schema? A cognitive structure that contains organized knowledge about marriage relationships. The amount of experience an individual has on marriage relationships. The number of marriages and divorces an individual has had. Or one's own personal strategy of how to manage conflicts in a marriage relationship. Go ahead and decide which answer you believe is correct. And then I will go ahead and reveal the answers to you. Okay, so if you answered number 1A, then you are correct. Number 2 is D. The correct answer for number 3 is B. 4 is D. 5 is C. 6 is A. 7 is B. 8 is C. 9 is D. And 10 is A. Hopefully you did a great job. Hopefully you got all correct. And if this presentation would have been in person instead of virtual, then I would have given you the quiz in paper form so that you would take it physically, and then I would have passed out all 4 handouts for each study that was discussed in the presentation, in the lecture, and you would have had that. And thank you for being here today to attend this workshop. I hope that you learned very much from it, and I hope that you can take some great advice from it, and I hope that you just enjoyed it. Thank you.